Hey friends, good evening. We have been discussing about 5 important things to deal with diabetes. We have completed actually 4, and none of you asked me about the 5th important thing. So here's the 5th important thing, that's stress. If you're really interested in learning something about stress, please pause this audio, take a pen and a notepad and write it down so you may understand some of the key things that I'm going to mention here. All right, let me give you an outline and basics as to what exactly stress is. Stress is actually the response we humans have towards any change or demand. Sometimes the change could be a positive thing or a negative thing, but your body responds automatically to this change. I'm going to talk a little bit of anatomy and physiology here. I hope I'm not going to confuse you. Let me try my best to explain it better. We all know about the central nervous system, which is made of the brain and spinal cord. There's a part of this nervous system which is called as the autonomic nervous system. Actually, the stress response is controlled in the body by this nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system actually has got 2 divisions. One is the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the one that induces the stress response, and the parasympathetic nervous system does just the opposite of what the sympathetic nervous system does. That is the relaxation response. Okay. Suppose, for example, when you experience a sudden change in your life, like a loss of job or a sudden loss of your health, the sympathetic nervous system sends out messages to your muscles, organs, and glands, which in turn produces chemicals like adrenaline, cortisol, aldosterone, and many other hormones and neurotransmitters. When I say hormones and neurotransmitters, they are pretty much the same. These are some of the things that can cause a reaction or a change, a response in our muscles and organs. So as a result of stimulation or production of these hormones, multiple effects happen in the body, like increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, blood vessel spasm, heart rhythm disturbance, and increased stomach acid sometimes, increased muscle tension, and sometimes, of course, increased sugar level and short and shallow breath. You may gasp. These are some of the things you may experience. What I want you to understand is stress can actually affect anyone. In fact, any creature on earth. Think about this. It can affect your kids too. They become stressed when they are about to be punished for some mistake that they have committed. Now that we know what happens inside the body as a result of stress, the question is, does it actually cause diseases like diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, and heart disease? Well, the answer is yes. It may fuel or trigger an existing disease. Again, it's not a cause of that disease, but it may fuel to that existing disease, but it isn't really a standalone cause for any of the lifestyle diseases like diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, and heart disease. Well, stress is real, but it is largely being used as a scapegoat is what I would say. Stress in itself is not a toxin to the body. It is a normal, natural part of our life, which all of us go through. Well, the major way stress hurt you is like this. Let me talk a little more of the anatomy and physiology. I told you about the central nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, there's something within this system that's called as the HPA axis. What it means is hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, simply known as the HPA axis. When people talk about stress, the psychiatrists may talk a lot about the HPA axis. Well, it is the headquarters of the stress or in other words, the central stress response system. This is where the stress takes its origin. Okay. Now, HPA axis has got three important areas, two from the brain. One is the hypothalamus, and the other one is the pituitary gland. Okay. Hypothalamus is a small region in your brain, around the base of your brain, and close to the hypothalamus is a small gland called the pituitary gland. And then we have the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland is something right on top of your kidney. Okay. Now let me tell you what happens when you're stressed. Okay. When you experience a sudden change, a sensory input is sent from your eyes, ears, or touch to the hypothalamus, and that hypothalamus in turn stimulates the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland stimulates the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys. Actually, there's a big chain of reaction that goes from hypothalamus to the pituitary gland to the adrenal gland, but to help you understand easily, I'm not just elaborating it. So in response to a stress stimulus, as I mentioned, the chain of reactions take place throughout the system. So the nervous system sends messages to the adrenal glands to pump out some of the hormones like adrenaline. Okay, this is the initial hormone that is produced by the adrenal gland. What this adrenaline does is to immediately trigger something called as the fight or flight response, a temporary state of fear, anxiety, which causes the earlier, as I mentioned, the rise in heart rate, blood pressure, and breath rate. It is a physiological state that temporarily even puts eating on hold. But if the stress persists, okay, now initially I mentioned adrenal gland produces adrenaline, but if the stress persists, it's completely a different story. The adrenal glands begin to release another important hormone called the cortisol, and cortisol actually increases your appetite and may ramp up the motivation to eat. Once a stressful episode is over, cortisol level should fall, and but if it doesn't fall, if the stress doesn't go away, or if the person's stress response gets stuck in the same position, this cortisol level may stay elevated. Numerous studies have shown that chronic physical or emotional distress, or the stress increases the intake of food high in fat, sugar, and salt. In fact, these are the three important things that we get addicted to. Once ingested, fat, sugar, and salt seem to reduce the related response and the overall stress, by increasing the level of another hormone called the dopamine. Okay, fat, sugar, and salt, as you consume it, it can actually cause the release of another hormone called the dopamine. Dopamine is just the opposite of stress hormone. It is called as the pleasure hormone. But unfortunately, the repeated production of high level of dopamine results in addiction towards the food rich in fat, sugar, and salt. The more and more a person indulges in addictive eating rich in salt, sugar, and fat, the more and more stressed they become. Addiction, dopamine release, and stress is a completely different story. I'm going to talk about that in completely different audio soon. So my understanding about stress and diabetes is this. There's a pathway as to how stress may be a cause of diabetes. People who are chronically stressed tend to reward themselves with overeating. They may not be so much motivated to have a regular exercise routine in place, or they may be sleep deprived. Interestingly, most people who are stressed have all of these or two of these. So it goes like this. Stress leads to overeating, sleep deprivation, and lack of exercise, which is more than enough to cause insulin resistance and diabetes. Well, if you still believe stress directly causes diabetes, let me tell you something interesting. The biggest stress anyone could experience is when they undergo a life or death situation, right? But what history teaches us is something else. I'm going to share an important story. Norway was one of the several Western European nations occupied by Nazis, Germans, during the conflict between 1939 through 1945. Consider the times of unthinkable mental and emotional strain of these Norwegians during World War II. People during these war years were actually being killed and displaced from their homes and families. In other words, these people were so stressed to death. During this period, Germans actually did something. They removed all the animal livestock from the Norwegians, whereas Norwegians used to indulge in more of meat eating, which used to be their food. And Norwegians had no other options at this time than to eat whole grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. Guess what? Almost immediately, when they switched over to this diet, death from heart attack, diabetes, and stroke in Norway literally went down. Okay, and then with Germans moving out of Norway in the year 1945, animal products, became available, and back came the diabetes, back came the heart disease and stroke. This is all documented. It is a powerful lesson in the public health about the actual cause and stress not being one of them. Well, so now that we know stress is real, and we also learn what is chronic, we also learn that in chronically stressed people, that body is flooded with cortisol. Now, what are the best possible ways to reduce cortisol level? I hear most of you saying meditation is the answer. Yes, of course. What else could you think of? The answer is anything that gets you closer to nature has been proven to reduce the cortisol level and the stress level eventually. Like breathing fresh air from the trees, listening to the birds chirping, spending time with the pets, spending adequate time with our family members releases natural levels of dopamine, the pleasure hormone, and the other happy hormones like oxytocin, serotonin, which all can bring the cortisol level down. Adequate amount of rest in a pitch dark room releases another hormone called the melatonin, which is also commonly called the sleep hormone, which reduces the level of cortisol. These are not my own words, these are clearly documented, okay? So these are all some of the great choices, but there's something that most of us have forgotten, which is called the earthing or grounding. Earthing or grounding is something where we connect our bare body to the earth, like walking barefoot on the grass, beach, bathing in the sea can literally bring down the cortisol level in just a matter of 15 to 20 minutes. Yes, I mentioned 15 to 20 minutes. Earthing or grounding can bring down your cortisol level so quickly. Earthing is something which used to naturally occur when we used to be kids spending time at our grandparents' house in the village. We don't have to wear our chapel, and we used to run around, and we get enough of earthing. But unfortunately, majority of us have long been disconnected from this amazing healing power of earth. We even do not remember, most of us do not remember when was the last time we happened to walk barefoot on the grass or moist ground. So I'm going to share some of the videos that talks a lot about earthing and grounding. All right, so I don't want this message to be too long, but these are some of the effective ways to manage stress. So I'm sure you have a clear understanding about stress, diabetes, and how to deal with it. So I'm just waiting for you to share your comments and doubts below. So let me hear from you all soon. God bless you all.